Sometimes your manager is simply not who you promised to be. He's like a surgeon who has a framed diploma, yet he hadn't picked up a scalpel for 10 years.
It's Chaile time.
Have you ever worked for a manager who seems to be so incompetent that you have to do all his work for him and yet he's the one taking credit for it? I have. This week we are looking at detecting the incompetent boss, the warning signs your manager cannot do the job. Detecting the incompetent boss, the warning signs that your manager cannot do the job. But first, the 10th of September 2026 is around the corner. Our Harmony People Network Conference. If you have not booked your ticket yet, then it is time to click at the bottom. The title is From Good to Great, how AI is reshaping the workplace. And this week we introduce one of our keynote speakers, Marno Boshoff, who is a culture evangelist for King Price. And his title that he will be talking on is From Good Culture to Great Culture, the leadership behaviors that make it real.
My name is Marno Boshoff, and I'm the culture evangelist here at King Price Insurance. Last 14 years, we've really dedicated ourselves to understand culture better, learn lessons, learn from our own mistakes, other people's mistakes, etc. And I'll be speaking at the Harmony People Network and HR conference in September. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. The session will be focusing on some of the stuff we've learned from research, what leaders should be doing to really cultivate a healthy culture in organizations. What are some of those habits? What are the things we need to get right? What are some of the pitfalls we want to avoid? And I think out of our recent research with the last couple of years now, there's a couple of lessons I would love to share with you. I see more and more that people say, listen, my everyday job is not the challenge. Doing my work is not so difficult. I'm qualified for it. I studied it or whatever. But managing people, organizing my team, building a healthy culture, creating an environment where people can flourish, that's the biggest challenge. That's the most difficult thing. So join us at the conference and I'd love to share some ideas with you.
So, how do you detect the incompetent boss? I had the privilege this week it's actually last week, of doing an investigation at the company, and there was actually a whistleblower report, sort of a grievance that came against this manager, basically focusing on autocratic management style towards the people in the department, but also to some degree, the lack of training and the responsibility for the performance of the department overall. Which made me think a bit. It made me remember a couple of years ago, I was working in corporate and I had a manager, quite interesting. I always had to do his work for him. At some point, I started to realize, but listen, this manager, my line manager, he seems to be actually not being able to do the work. It seems like he had a technical inability to do the work. And then to my amazement, when I will write reporting or so, then he will present it to the MANCO, the management committee, and then he will take the credit for it. It actually got so out of hand one day that I actually saw him applying for another job. And now in those days, I've just finished, studied a master's degree in business administration. And I saw him, because now he's my manager and I had to obviously report my marks to him. And I saw him on his CV putting, that he's the one who did the MBA, and he put my subjects and my marks in there. And that really made me to think, how do companies ensure that when they place or employ white collar workers, and here we talk about technical staff, senior staff, professional people, your accountants, your managers, your CEOs, your marketing executive, these kind of people. How do companies ensure that these people, they are skilled to the level they are claiming to be? On your CV, you claim to be a certain person. How can a company ensure that they are technically astute as they really claim to be? Do companies actually test for technical abilities, yes or no? So in this investigation, I then had the privilege of interviewing about 10 people, all the people in the department, and yes, one after the other explained to me the autocratic leadership style of this manager. But something else stood out for me. Now, the company, the people themselves, the staff, they did not really focus on that. They probably didn't realize it. But one thing that, besides now the autocratic leadership style, that really stood out for me was this big question mark that maybe this person is not really qualified. It happens these days in South Africa, that people will buy their qualifications. Now, I'm not saying this person is not qualified in terms of the qualification itself, the studies that the person studied, whatever the case may be. But are you really competent in doing the job? Because what happened is that this person, the manager, will keep on delegating work to others, just like my boss did to me. And then she will report the work as though it was her own, and then take the credit for it. To this degree where I start asking staff, but listen, do you think she's actually able to do the work? And how many of them started to tell me after thinking a while, you know what? They've actually never seen her doing the technical side of the work itself. She's always relying on others, okay? Which sort of raised the flag in my mind, like, most employers that I'm aware of, when they employ people, they will go by the CV, have a bit of a face-on-face interview, but they don't really test for technical skills. Now, you can maybe allude to this and say, but listen, you're even asking yourself, but can your manager or your line manager do their job? So, and obviously there are a vast amount of professions out there, doctors, engineers, finance managers, just operations managers, but the same principle goes to all of them. Was there any assessments done to see whether the person can actually operate and manage to the required skill as required by the job? So I want to flag some 4 or 5, 4 elements or factors how you can identify the incompetent boss. So yeah, I'm talking to the employee today. So you're going to be doing a bit of an assessment of your manager, your line manager, whether that's a operations manager, general manager, CEO, an accountant. Sometimes accountants and marketing people they will manage their own departments, HODs and so on. Even an HR manager, you can also looking to see if they are competent or not. And we're going to look at specifically what came out of this investigation. So the number one is the deletion directive. And that is something that I experience also. So this kind of person, your line manager, has the tendency to delegate work to others. Okay? But now remember, there's a difference between delegating work as a sound management principle or practice and delegation, okay, where you actually take advantage of others because you are not competent to do the work, okay? And then with that, hand in hand goes an instruction for you to typically delete the email, okay, because it's confidential. And you will then find her or him to report to their seniors that this work was actually completed by him or herself, and won't give actually credit to you, the person who did the work. So in this interview situation where I investigated, I actually found that the finance manager, she's got a team of about 10 people. Most of them are quite senior, but there are 2 that are very juniors. junior. Last year they were interns in the company, and now they are juniors in the company. But interesting is that she asks her work, she delegates it to those two juniors. She doesn't even ask the seniors to do the work. She asks the juniors to do the work. And when there's something wrong, she blames the others. When there's credit to be given, she takes the credit for herself. But also interesting is, whenever there's a meeting with her seniors, the one junior must always go with. In order if there are questions, then the junior can also explain. So she's always under the umbrella of, or this idea of, I'm training other people. But sometimes, delegating is not a training mechanism or a training tool. It's really you hiding your incompetence. And what I also start to realize then is that, but listen, maybe the reason why she doesn't delegate the work to seniors is because the seniors will be able to expose her incompetence. These are just questions that came up to me because one after another explained to me how she always delegates all her work to the juniors, and the seniors never get to see her work. I even asked the juniors, do you believe that she's competent? And they just said, they've actually never seen her work, okay? The second element, how you can actually detect an incompetent boss, is the technical blackout. Okay, when working with a person like that, I've even alluded to now already, you actually have never the opportunity to look at their technical expertise because for some reason they hide it. Okay, they're always behind a closed door. They sit in the office somewhere and they merely give instructions, but they are like a closed door. They have this filter around them. They do not allow you in. They do not allow you to see their work because they always delegate it out and then they shut that door. So you can never really pinpoint fingers, okay? And then, also came out in this interview is AI training. So part of her responsibility is to train her staff, those under her department. And from time to time, there will be training interventions, even though training was one of the complaints in the whistleblower report, in that it hardly ever happens apparently. But okay, so after my interviews, it came out that from time to time there are training, but here's the thing. You'll expect an executive to have the ability, the technical expertise to be able to train your staff. Not in this case. In this case, the training is always based on Google and AI platforms like ChatGPT. That starts to raise the question and even the flag even further. But listen, are you actually able? Are you actually an expert of this field of yours? Okay. And then there's a fourth element, the vague feedback loop. What you will find with a person like this is they typically have an autocratic leadership style, and their communication style is very mood driven. Okay, so when you challenge this person, typically, let's say on numbers, they do not respond with data. Okay, they respond with emotion, and they try to shut you as the subordinate. They try to shut you down. Okay, try to speak over you, try to bully you as if you now ignorant, you do not know, you don't know what you're doing. And that also came out in this interview where, when she does get challenged, she will typically say, oh, you are stupid, or you don't know what you're doing. I thought you were qualified, So that is typically a character of the management style of the incompetent line manager, where they will simply try to shut you out, bully you, instead of engaging in a logical and a technical conversation around the problem that may be in front of the people or on around the table. And another element that is quite interesting with a person like this, a manager, typically managers, because they have the power to make decisions, is that they create a structure around them that is about to fail. Okay, and in this case, This person literally weaponized delegation. And this is where I said, there's a difference between a healthy delegation and simply passing the buck, okay? And when things go wrong, the person will then simply start blaming others. So they create this structure around them. The structure, I want to call it a structure of incompetence, okay? A structure where, in this case now, where she will draw junior staff into her circle, exclude the seniors, and start delegating her authority or her work to the juniors. They write her reports, they do the work for her, they have to go with her to the MANCA and the EXCO committees in order to present. And if there is something that went wrong, she blames them. But also they are there to actually help her explain all the work under the umbrella of I'm training. Okay. Do you see there's a fine line here? Okay. But what she's effectively doing, she's creating this unhealthy structure where everybody is looking from the outside. So I even had interviews with her peers, 2 people who are peers who are on the same level as she, and they even noticed and said, but listen, she's always surrounded by juniors. She's like completely excluding seniors from her line of work. Okay. This is a structure the person creates. You look at the people around who these people try to associate with, affiliate with, who do they delegate with, and you'll find often a person who's a boss or a manager is incompetent. They delegate and outsource work to people who can't question them because they probably not supposed to have the skill to be able to question the manager. So they will delegate to people who can't question them, who can't challenge them. So they feel safe in that environment, in that structure that they created for themselves. Because they know if they're going to start including senior staff in this circle, in this ambit, okay, they're going to get challenged and they're going to get exposed. So here's the whole point of this podcast. What is the solution here? I suppose the solution are on 2 levels, but predominantly, and this is a challenge for recruiters, the person that does recruiting for your company is the HR manager, maybe it's a recruiting agency, or maybe a recruiter that specializes in this field. I know that a lot of recruiters and people who are responsible for filling vacancies in the company, they will, place advertisements in the media, they will get CVs in, they will shortlist, they'll go through the CVs and they will call you for an interview. But should employers, especially when it comes to your white-collar workers, your technical astute employees, your senior staff, your CEOs, your GMs, your operations managers, your mid-level managers, your HR managers, your accountants, your marketing managers, should they subject those people to a technical analysis? I believe they should. Okay. Or are we simply going to accept people on face value and what is stated on their CV? Now remember, a CV will tell you what the person claimed they did. A technical assessment will show you their real level of competence. I don't see this happening in the workplace. You will employ a general manager and you will just, go by the CV. He's got 20 years of experience, running businesses. But I believe we should start venturing into a direction where you start asking applicants for employment to start writing technical assessments, tests, but not just tests that is like a school level test, case study test, where people can actually deal with real world problems and see if they can actually resolve it. That, in my mind, that is probably a big leap forward in trying to eradicate the situation of people submitting fake and fraudulent diplomas and degrees, claiming they've studied somewhere but they haven't. And it's also much more cost effective than identifying an incompetent person during the recruitment process, than exposing that person to your organization and your organizational culture. Just imagine the damage that a person like that can cause in your company by sitting there for years. And from a labor relations perspective, from a litigation perspective, it is not so easy to simply get rid of a person like that. From an IR perspective, okay, this person is now in the fold, in the mix. How do you deal with the person? So the solution is twofold. First of all, the recruitment stage, I really believe employers should start implementing a technical assessment. But okay, so now the person is in the system, how do you deal with this? It's not so simple to just simply get rid of a person. You have to follow the incapacity process, specifically relating to poor performance in terms of Schedule 8 of the Code of Good Practice, where basically, in principle, you'll subject a person to a PIP process, as they call it. It stands for a Performance Improvement Program. You'll typically make sure that the person's got their key performance indicators, or more commonly called KPI or KRI. It's the same thing. You'll make sure the person is aware of the required performance standards, that the person got a reasonable time to actually achieve the required performance standards. If there are any assistance that is needed that you can give as an employer, then you give that assistance, but also keep in mind it's not always necessary. There's a higher burden of trust vested in a more senior person. The more senior a person it is, the less, I suppose, assistance is required. I mean, if you are a brain surgeon, for instance, you don't expect your employer to train you how to operate on a person's brain, do you? There's an expectation that you can do that competently. And then obviously, there need to be a period of time where a person's performance can be evaluated and monitored. And lastly, the person should be given an opportunity to make representations in terms of his or her own competence. That's basically how you deal with it. But the thing is, a technically secure leader does not have to bully their staff to protect their own ego. I'm leaving you with that for this week. A technically secure leader does not have to bully their staff to protect their ego. So, that is it for this week in Is Chaile Time, and let's now look at job review, fresh vacancies in our network for this week, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Good morning, Harmony people. Let's have a look at some of the vacancies posted nationwide on our Harmony People's Network this week. First up, Mugati Pala and Associates is seeking a meeting scriber and administrative officer. Sheksolve is looking to hire a safety officer. Prime Corps is seeking a quality controller. And last but not least, in Cape Town, there is an opportunity for an HR manager. For the full information of the mentioned positions, how to apply, as well as more available positions, find the vacancy link in the description. You will also find a link to a useful video on how to compose a winning CV and have a successful interview. Tune in again next week for more Harmony vacancies.